This land is your land. This land is my land. From California.
Good evening. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. This evening, our guest is BT Livermore. And in just a moment, BT will be back and tell you all about what he is up to. Remember that you can find us on Facebook, and you can also email us at heartstockradio@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Heartstock.
As I went walking and ripping the highway, I saw above me that in the skyway, I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled and I followed my...
Hi, I'm your host, Carol Murphy, and this is Heartstock Radio. Here in the studio, yay, it's always really fun when we get to interview here live in the studio, is BT Livermore. Hi, BT.
Hi, Carol.
Thank you so much for being on Heartstock. Please tell our listeners just a little intro about yourself and what you are up to.
Sure. Thank you for having me on the show. I like to call myself a maker of things and provider of services. I've had that phrase on my business cards for the last few years, mostly because I ran out of space for all the things that I end up doing. I'm a self-employed artist, designer, printer, sign painter, occasional woodworker. I moved to Butte in 2016 to help found the Pheonix Fabrication Studios, which is a nonprofit makerspace that will be opening up later this year.
2016, how time flies.
Exactly.
It seems like just yesterday. So part and parcel of what I hope we can talk about next is, what brought you here to Butte. But let's back up in time a little bit and maybe just tell our listeners a little bit about your story, where you grew up and all that kind of fun stuff.
Sure. I grew up in Minneapolis or around Minneapolis and kind of as a young adult bounced around Minneapolis and St. Paul before moving to Portland, Oregon in 2005. Spent 11 years there before coming to Butte. My kind of personal journey towards my business and career path, I've known since, single digit ages that this is what I wanted to do. I never really was comfortable with the kind of regular job situation, people telling me what to do. I was always good at being self-motivated. And even as far as junior high, I remember friends, me convincing friends to let me draw things for them for money or, trading for other things. And that was kind of the unofficial start of my freelance career. But the official start was when I was 19. And I was very interested in web design, and I was in bands. I had friends that were in bands or were artists, and none of us could afford a website. So I learned how to code and started doing that as a sort of half-time freelance career. Once I moved to Portland, I eventually got a degree in illustration at Pacific Northwest College of Art, and that really took off from there. I was doing a lot of spot illustrations and logo design. I'd kind of dropped the web side of things by then. But that was kind of the beginning of my fully self-employed lifestyle. And then alongside that, doing client work and freelance stuff from 2008 until 2017 or so, I co-owned Man's Face Stuff, which is a mustache and beard styling products company, which honestly, myself and my business partner kind of fell into. I had a mustache that was getting pretty unruly, and my friend was sort of an amateur scientist, and we formulated a product that worked well in Portland's downpours that can go out and bike and still have a well-styled facial hair. And in that process, he grew some facial hair to test it out as well. And we just sort of rode the wave of, West Coast, especially that sort of mustache beard popularity. And it was honestly for a good long time more successful and took up more time than what my freelance career was at the time. And that was always it was an interesting shift for me to suddenly be making a personal care product as someone who has always just sort of done digital work. And then all of a sudden we have this very physical product that is very personal. It's sitting there right under your nose. There's the whole psychology of smells behind that. And, we would get emails of people telling us how we made their life better because we made this product that just made them look better and feel better. And so that kind of ended when I moved to Butte, a little bit after moving to Butte. And now that I'm here, I'm still doing my freelance design and painting and things like that. But I also work at the Imagine Butte Resource Center and the Pheonix Fabrication Studios. And then I also am an adjunct professor at Tech, which is something I really love.
What do you teach at Tech?
I teach a class called Desktop Publishing, which is mainly based in Adobe InDesign, but a little bit of other kind of graphic design thrown in as well.
That sounds like an awful lot of fun. Let's talk a little bit for a moment about how things unfolded when you decided to come to Butte. Mm-hmm. What was the draw, and what made you decide to come, from Portland to here?
Sure. Montana in general, I had family out here when I was growing up, and both my parents were teachers, so had summers off. So we did a lot of road trips out to Montana and drove all around. So it was always of interest to me. And actually, when I right out of high school, I had considered going to MSU and opted to stay in Minnesota at the time. But I started coming out to Butte specifically in 2013 to be a resident artist of the Imagine Butte Resource Center. And I came out for 2 weeks with another friend, and we had a show in the gallery. And I got to meet this wonderful community and see all the beautiful buildings and ghost signs and get, a lot of visual inspiration that this town has as well. And I ended up coming back in 2014 for the entire summer. And same thing, had a show at the IBRC gallery and met more people, became more inspired. And around that time, Portland was getting much more expensive, a lot busier, heavy traffic. And I was feeling the need to move. I had, in the time that I was in Portland, over my 11 years there, started 3 different progressively larger cooperative art studio, creative studio spaces that ranged anywhere from the first one being, I think, 6 people and a couple hundred square feet. That was mostly just illustrators and people working at desks, moving up to 1,200 square foot space that also had screen printing and a little bit of woodwork and kind of a different set of people. And then the final studio called Magnetic North, which is 3,800 square feet. And I think we had up to a dozen people who were active members, and that we had a full wood shop, full screen printing setup. I did all my sign painting there. We made all the mustache wax there. And then we had a number of people that just had office spaces. And through that space, we were able to launch. We were able to provide affordable space for a number of different artists. We also launched, it's called Coffee Beer, which eventually moved out of the space and into a full-fledged sort of coffee shop. And I felt that there was like another step beyond that. I had kept growing these spaces, but financially and just sort of where Portland was at, there are already a number of larger, shared spaces and community spaces that you can go to. And I didn't really feel like there was room for another one or room to grow the way I wanted to grow there. And I had started looking at a number of different cities all around the country that I had been to or had friends in or some other contact. And I ended up coming out to Butte again for the Folk Festival in 2016. And that was right when the idea of what the Pheonix Fabrication Studios could be had just sort of hatched that idea. And that was exactly what I was looking for. And I realized that this is an idea that seemed to be more needed here than it was in Portland. So that was kind of my final decision making for coming here.
I'm always curious because Butte has, certain ambiance and draw. It's like certain places you go to have this inspiring effect upon artists. Do you find that here? What is it about Butte that has that element of draw and inspiration?
I think this city, uptown specifically, looks like no other place. The history that you can still feel here and the design of the buildings and you can go to other major cities in the US and you see a few buildings here or there that are still standing that have this same look, but to be able to walk around uptown and see every building, having this older style to it. And for me specifically, as a sign painter, someone who's kind of been a letter nerd for a long time, seeing all the ghost signs that are still hanging on to the side of the buildings, the old advertisements and things like that, that's where I get a lot of inspiration from for my own work. And so to be able to actually come here and see that kind of stuff every day is such a great thing for someone in my position. But even I've learned from talking to other artists who live here or are passing through, even if they're not thinking of lettering necessarily or signage or anything like that, they are still inspired by the visuals of this place.
How much does our history of mining play into that and kind of our, well, I like to call it boom and bust cycle, which we're in a recovery mode from? How much does that play into the draw, do you think?
I've a few people, like certainly people passing through, they may not necessarily know that history. Obviously, you find out about that once you are here for a while or move here. I certainly think the sort of boom bust concept is in this sort of recovery from a bust makes this place attractive to artists and other creative types, whether it be the actual visuals of the city, but also just financially speaking, there is a lot of open spaces here. There's a lot of cheaper rent than other cities nearby or further away. And then once you actually get to spend time here and realize, the accepting community that's here, that kind of seals the deal for me.
The Magnetic North shared space that you had, you mentioned that you had a vision beyond that. What was that vision that you've brought here with you to Butte? Mm-hmm.
I think what I've learned through those spaces and through being able to teach at a university, I also taught at Portland State for a little bit before I moved, is what a huge part of my own personal work that I do and is the sharing of like the knowledge that I've been able to acquire through trial and error or through other, normal educational means. I have been, lucky enough to have taken the time to, acquire equipment. I have a full wood shop that I love letting people come down and use if they want. I am always happy to share in what I have and what I know. And I think what the Pheonix Fabrication Studio, how that's different than the other studios that I've started before or been a part of starting, those were all very specific member studios. It was always, myself and 5 people, we all were ganging up to rent a space. And then with the last Magnetic North, there was enough changeover that we were sort of a known entity, a known studio space and time, where if we had an open desk or an open space, we could start bringing new people in there, which hadn't really happened in the first 2 spaces. It was always a very defined group of people. And I have this kind of love of sharing knowledge and teaching, and I think I rebelled against it, having 2 parents that were both in education. That was not something I was wanting to get into, and then I realized that it is exactly what I want to do. And so the Fabrication Studios, being an entity in itself there are certainly, team members that are involved in keeping it going and getting it started, but a lot of it will be based on the actual users of the space, who are not necessarily coming in and being, financially liable for paying for the space, but through their membership dues and workshop fees and things like that, they will be able to keep the space going, and we'll share the knowledge that we have, and hopefully by that point we have a kind of get the ball rolling, and we'll have a larger group of people who are there all the time who are also willing to then share the knowledge that they have.
So we're at about that halfway point. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with BT Livermore. This is Heartstock. This is Heartstock Radio. Thanks for listening. I'm Carol Murphy, your host. And today we have BT Livermore here in the studios. Hi again, BT.
Hi.
So you were just sharing a little bit about your vision for Pheonix Fabrication Studios. And maybe we could start there with you sharing what the space is like. What do you envision? And, how large of a space is it? And where is it at currently? And where are you going with it? And how are you going to get there, kind of thing? I know that's a lot, but let's build that image of what it is that you're building.
Sure. Well, first off, the Pheonix Fabrication Studios is located on the Pheonix building campus here in uptown Butte, right on Park Street. It's a back warehouse that faces Galena. Currently, we're saying it's about 12,000 square feet of space, plus there is a basement access as well that we will hopefully get to use in the future. And the general idea of it is that it will be built around a handful of shared larger studio spaces. So there's a printmaking space, which will be based off of what we already have at the Imagine Butte Resource Center, and then adding to that. But we'll also have a wood shop, metal shop, ceramic studio, and a photo darkroom. And the photo darkroom actually is interesting because that was not part of the original plan, but we had given a survey to anyone who was coming into the IBRC, or we had it available online. And there was as much interest in having a photo darkroom as there was most of the other major studio spaces that we were already planning. So that's actually something we're getting going right now in sort of a miniature format at the IBRC to be able to expand later. But besides those 5 studios, the space that we have is a very large raw warehouse space right now. And so having rentable private studio spaces is a huge part of what we want to do and provide larger classroom space than we've ever been able to have at the IBRC. And there's still room to grow beyond that. We'll probably have some sort of gallery there. We're working on having sort of a retail space where things that are made on site can be sold on site, which I think is a fascinating idea that I haven't really seen too much of, even in other maker spaces.
That's a really good idea, and kind of leads to my next question. From a business standpoint, it seems like what you're really offering is a place for an incubator of sorts for artists. So included in all of the wealth of knowledge that you have, not just from a maker's standpoint, but from a business standpoint, what kind of tools and equipment will makers be able to come to you for in the realm of, business and incubating their own artistic business?
Well, first off, I mean, we have this vision as an arts center and arts-based business, but one thing we've been really trying to do is reach out to talk to people who may never consider themselves an artist. I have spoken to a lot of people, especially who are wishing to start a furniture business or something like that, where, that word artist can be scary if you've never been told that you could be an artist, or maybe you specifically be told you can't be an artist. But
plus, they do starve. We've been told.
True. But I think that idea of, at the base level, the support of having an affordable space is something that seems to be a priority for a lot of people. Like we have had a lot of people say, like, I have these ideas for a business that I want to start, and maybe it takes some level of production, but they're either not going to go the route of like creating a business plan and getting a loan and getting a space. Maybe they're not able to, but there may be, thousands of dollars worth of equipment that they would have to buy, and that seems scary to them. So us being able to provide shared equipment and then affordable space, should they need that, private locking space, is kind of the basis of, helping a business grow. Beyond that, there are other services that we're planning on providing in terms of like marketing and branding help. We would love, I would personally love to have business workshops, like, talking about tax time and talking about, all the things that maybe if this is your first small business to start, you're forgetting about. That's definitely something we can provide as part of an educational component as well.
So funding, Let's talk about that a bit. How were you successful in funding your past ventures? And you mentioned that some of the income is going to be in the form of rented space and, fees to use the space. How have you funded the ventures in the past? And is that the same way that this is going to be funded, or are we changing it up a little bit?
So in the past, my former ventures have all been self or shared funding, because it was always more of my business or my venture or this shared group of people who are coming together for a space. This space is going to be a lot different, and it's something that's still pretty new to me, this idea of being in the nonprofit world. I've worked for some nonprofits before back in Portland, but I've never been this heavily involved in the kind of the back end and administration of nonprofit work. So similar to a lot of nonprofits, we have grants that we're going out for. We're always taking donations of both time, money, equipment, things like that. And then, as mentioned, there will be, a membership fee associated with using the studio. The people who will have private spaces will have rent on those. Certain things like the services that I mentioned that we'll be offering, some of those, depending on what they are, may be income generators as well. And then the retail space that I mentioned as well are all kind of different avenues to keep this thing funded and going.
Within the grant space, how do you know a good grant that fits with your endeavor? And do you have any maybe hints or suggestions for folks who are in the nonprofit realm working to get grants for their endeavors?
Well, the grant thing is one thing that's I'm fairly new at. And so luckily we have other people within the organization who are much more proficient at grant writing. And just one, from my experience finding what's out there, it's just searching for the grants that are available and finding the one that seems to be the best fit, or, having a very specific project or, whatever will be funded, I think needs to be laid out really well in a grant. Obviously, if you keep it really vague, whoever's making the final decision on that may pass you over for something that seems like a more cemented in plan.
Mm-hmm. So clear design and path. And who are the other members? Would you like to mention who else is helping you with this project, or who else you're helping?
We have a large group of people. I don't know if I'd feel bad trying to name everybody, but we have, this is an offshoot of the Imagine Butte Resource Center. We have our director, Olivia Everett, who's been there and helping for years. And then we have a much larger group of folks that are kind of coming in and out to help with planning the Fabrication Studios, people who are more expert in certain aspects, certain studios. Like I have a strong background in printmaking and wood, but I know next to nothing about metalwork, and I know very little about photography. And so we've sort of acquired team members that is their specialty. And that's nice to, break up the workload and certainly for things, metalwork and things like that, like there's a lot of safety issues that you need someone that's an expert in that and knows exactly how to handle all the ins and outs of those things.
So the Pheonix building, just to paint the picture further for folks who may not be from Butte or familiar with the Pheonix building, it's huge.
It is.
And how does all this tie into, management of the entire building? Is all the space that you have within the Pheonix building, is that like leased or purchased or owned by the IBRC?
We have a lease agreement with the owner of the building for the IBRC space and for the back building as well. The Pheonix building is huge. It is 6 stories up and 2 stories down, plus the 12,000 square foot warehouse connected to it. And, it was built in 1906 and was a mix of department store and small businesses and doctors' offices and also living spaces for people through most of the 20th century. And it seemed to be this hub of space. And at some point that was abandoned. And so I don't specifically worked for the owner of the building, but just due to what I do around the building, I've been able to, get a lot of building history and to sort of place myself as the unofficial historian of the building. I've done a lot of research at the archives and have spent a lot of time in these sort of abandoned upper floors that are in the process in the next coming years, hopefully being completely refurbished and allowing the Pheonix building to sort of rise from the ashes yet again and be a place of life and work.
So will it be that kind of multi-use future for the building that it had once in the past?
That is the plan.
Yeah, and that will really feed into what you have going on in the fabrication studio too, I think, especially from a commercial standpoint.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think at any point in the Pheonix's history, you could have lived upstairs and then walked downstairs to work if you worked at the department store or if you worked in one of the offices. And, for a certain amount of time, starting in the 30s, the basement was a grocery store. So it was a building you didn't have to leave if you didn't want to.
I didn't realize that. That's very cool.
We want to make it that kind of space again. Like there should be activity.
Yeah. We've got about 2 minutes left. Maybe you can share with our listeners some of your current challenges, what kind of resources you need.
Sure.
Where are you at?
For me, the biggest challenge, as I said, I'm kind of new to the administrative side of nonprofit world, and that is taking up a lot of my time, as it should. But finding the balance between that and sort of my own personal businesses and all these gigs that I'm trying to get as well in my own freelance world, that's always a struggle to maintain some sort of balance while still having a social life and family life and things like that.
It can take over for sure. And how might our listeners reach you if they'd like to get involved in this endeavor?
Sure. For the Fabrication Studios, we are Pheonix Fab Studios on Instagram. You can also ibrc.me has some information. We don't have a website for the Fabrication Studios yet. It's currently being built, but there's information there. And for my own personal work, btlivermore.com is my portfolio site, and I am also Big Time Livermore on Instagram.
Fantastic. This is Heartstock Radio, and thank you so much, BT.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Really great stuff you're doing. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week. This is your host, Carol Murphy, saying bye for now. Peace.
Heartstock Radio is a production of KBMF 102.5 Butte America Radio. Hear our live programs every Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time via livestream at butteamericaradio.org.